We have, thank you. We have youth organizer Pony White with us today. We have another youth organizer, Courtney Jones, with us today. We have the senior director of the Black Women's Health Imperative and my dear friend, Zane Epps, with us today. And then we have the wonderful and legendary and iconic Billy Avery with us today. So I don't want to talk too much in this opening. I'm going to go ahead and pass it directly to our youth to tell you what they've been doing for the last few months. So Courtney and Pony, please take it away.
Yeah, so for the past couple of months, we've been working on the We Remember Black Youth for Reproductive Freedom pamphlet. It's up, it's live right now, so we encourage everyone to check it out. Sharing a little bit about that pamphlet. The pamphlet was curated collaboratively by the vision of Bria Johnson and the support of the whole GGE team, including Tess, and written by 7 youth organizers based on our personal experiences as young people and as advocates. At a time when young people are often ignored or shut out of important conversations, we honor and uplift the authentic voices of youth leaders as experts in our own experiences in hopes to inspire and uplift other Black women, girls, and gender-expansive people.
Right, and how we did it was that, like Tony said, the 7 youth, Black girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth from around the US, we came together and we looked at ways that we could add to a piece of history, a beautiful piece of history, that is the African American Women for Reproductive Justice pamphlet from 1989. We looked at ways that we could rewrite, we could redefine, and we could craft new demands for reproductive freedom. We chose themes that were important to each of our lives, and then we wrote our own personal testaments to those, and then in turn they were synthesized by our beautiful editors, Tess and Bria. So the pamphlet is divided into the following themes: bodily autonomy and choice, racism and medicine, violence, access, education, youth criminalization, foster care and child protective services, and lastly, community and government. I believe we were coming from a place of care, but also a place where we were longing for better, just like the original folks that wrote this in 1989. And during our sessions, I personally saw youth in our group take charge of their own stories to uplift community needs and Black liberation. So Pony and I are going to read a few demands that we made. And of course, we're not going to read all of them, but it's the 15-point plan that you're seeing right now. But you can definitely view this on your own. That's why we're putting it out. So I'll read number 11 through 13 that you can see on the screen. We want to reunite families torn apart by family regulations, such as foster care system, and provide people with the resources they need. We also want to end the criminalization of youth and release all children from jails, prisons, and juvenile detention centers, and provide more restorative and healing practices and resources. We'd also like to fund public schools equitably and stop all public school book and curriculum bans. And I'll pass it over to Pony.
Yeah, thanks so much, Courtney. So I'm reading demands 1 through 3. So 1, ensure true access to safe, culturally affirming mental, physical, and reproductive health care for all sexes, genders, age, and classes. 2, end all criminalization of reproductive choices for all birthing people and for medical providers. This entails a divestment in policing, surveillance, and military funding, and additional investments in education, healthcare, and more. And 3, provide mandatory evidence-based training about culturally conscious, affirming, and inclusive care for medical professionals, especially regarding patients across the gender spectrum. So as Courtney said, these are not all 15 of the demands, and I know it's hard to see on the screen, so that's why you should go read the pamphlet right now and share it with your folks. So thank you all so much, and I'll pass it back to Bria.
Thank you so much. I can't stop smiling because I just remember what it was like being in the circles and you all were talking and you were trying to figure out which demands you wanted and thinking about what was important to you in repo justice. So I'm so happy to see you talk about your work. I want to go back a little bit and get a little historical and talk about the original pamphlet. I read online that you all wrote this original pamphlet in response to a Supreme Court decision that first started limiting states' rights to abortions. And so,
Yeah.
Billy, I would really love if you could talk to us about like what was the moment around this pamphlet? What were you thinking about when you wrote it? Just about that time.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thanks so much for inviting me. And I want to, before I talk about 89, I just want to talk about now and say that I am so proud to see you young women taking this on, making it your own, claiming it, looking at what ways you're going to address these issues, because it's your future that you are working for. And the same way as in 89, it was ours. But we are older now. And you know, you need to come up with what's meaningful for you today and your strategies. And you're so far along than we are because you have shoulders to stand on, when in fact we had very few shoulders, almost none in this area. Of course, there were strong Black women who have been working for many, many things, but as we evolve, we become freer and braver. And so I'm just glad to see you doing this work. Your pamphlet is incredible. It's a beautiful piece of work. It's comprehensive. And later on in discussion, there's just one thing I want to bring up that I want you to think about. I'm not suggesting you change, but I'm suggesting you think about your strategy around how you present it. I'm not saying you need to change any words, but I know that there'll be some pushback among people who you want to build allies with, then you might need to do some explaining. But remind me, I don't want to get carried off into that right now. I want to answer your question. The Webster decision was a ruling that would allow states to restrict abortion, um, even though it was nationwide access. And so just as we have, you know, it would create a patchwork of abortions, but now I don't even know if we have what's called a patchwork. This different thing is looking more like a big blanket to me than it is a patchwork quilt. We wish for some patches, but not now. But you got to understand, in 89, now I helped along with two other women. We opened up an abortion clinic in Gainesville, Florida in 1975. Okay. And at that time, Black women did not talk about abortion. You never even heard the word. It is a word I've never heard my mother say. I've never heard that actual word come out of her mouth. And neither did it come out of the mouths of many Black women. So at the abortion clinic, I saw over 50% of the women who came in for abortion were Black. And they didn't come in by themselves. They came in with their boyfriends and their husbands, and they were holding their heads up high in the clinic. Nobody was sneaking around, acting as if something was going on. But we were and we lived in a small town, Gainesville, Florida. We were less than 20% of the population, yet we were 50% of the abortions. Now I know a lot of people came from surrounding areas, but nevertheless, that's what the reality was. And so what the problem was is that we could not get anybody to even sign a postcard, let alone talk about advocacy. So there were only about 3 or 4 or 5 of us in the whole country who were brave enough to speak out. And so this was in the 70s. So we later did a birthing center, and I noticed a lot of the same kinds of things, but for different reasons that Black women weren't participating. But a lot of the same reasons, but different. It wasn't because no one talked about childbirth. It wasn't because there were other reasons that also got in the way of women getting abortions. So I also had witnessed several Black women dying from self-induced abortions. And so there's no desperation like the desperation of a woman who is carrying a child that she does not want to carry at a time that's not good for her, at a time that's not working. It is. And so when the white women came to ask us about helping them get abortions, we could tell them how to go to New York and what to do, but the Black women couldn't. So just having it accessible doesn't necessarily mean it's available, to everyone. If it's available and you can't, if I got it, you need it and you can't get it, then it's not available. So anyway, so we came together to look at how are we going to break this conspiracy of silence of Black women not talking about abortion, not being just getting them, but not talking. And so that was what the pamphlet was all about, to come out as a group of Black women saying that we need to say the word, we need to talk about it. I know even in the Black Women's Health Project, and this is uh, right around 89, 88, 99, the women would talk about everything in the world. They talked about incest. What's wrong with it? It was the only time I was told I was being loved. They talked about being raped. They talked about all of the sexual abuse that went on among their families. But do you think they talk about abortion? No.
Mm.
And so now we have Black women talking about it, but there's still a whole big group of Black women who are still not talking about it and still won't let the words go across their lips. So while I applaud all of you, and you see all these RJ groups now, RJ, 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 there's still a whole bunch of people who not saying the word. Okay, so don't start resting on your laurels because we are not there. We are nowhere there. We are just beginning. And so we came together to speak out. And I mean, we had many programs. And, Julie Jackson McCabe, Dr. Dorothy Height, Loretta Ross, me. I mean, you could count them on both hands who would stand up in front of a group of people and talk about abortion and say it's okay to say the words. Now, there were a lot of things getting in the way, the Black church, the ministers. I can remember going to speak to an ecumenical conference there in Atlanta about the Black Women's Health Project, and they knew that I had founded an abortion clinic and a birthing center. And later on, I get calls from them asking me where could they help women get abortions. And some of them were their women, and some of them were women in the church. So, and I had to speak one time, many times I spoke in the pulpit and talked about abortion from the pulpit in the church. So don't be scared to go in those places because you absolutely have to go in there sometime. So anyway, so we came together to talk about some things, to talk about our past, how most of us hadn't unraveled from that internalized depression and all of the negative things that have been said to us while we were enslaved. And then under Jim Crow rule that said where you could live, where you couldn't live, we were not free. If you thought you were free, but if you can't make choices, you're not free. So what is freedom without choice? And some people had no choice. During our talking and learning who we were to be Black, what it was meant to be Black and female, and to also examine historically things that had happened to us, because all of the trauma, all of the attitudes, all of the ways of handling things get passed down through the family, either by, mostly in Black families, by not talking, but just doing. And you okay as long as you don't talk about it. Don't flaunt it. Don't talk about it. We had to overcome those things. I had to deal with it with my mother. You know, my mother was, when we opened up the abortion clinic, she did not come. She did not tell anybody what I was doing or
Wow.
anything. We opened up the birthing center. She came and brought a whole carload of her friends. You know,
Mm,
and that was just only 4 years later. So, you know, so
mm,
she still was having struggle, even though she silently um supported me. The best thing she did was not discourage me. So I got her support from her not discouraging me, you
mm,
know. So I'm saying that a big conspiracy of silence has been broken. That's what this whole document was about, to do some analysis of it and to stop beating up on ourselves that somehow something was wrong with us, but to acknowledge that we live in a very broken system, a system full of racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, all of the transism, all everything that's going on that says to us we are not worthy, we are not powerful, we are not we are not smart enough to be in charge of our lives, we
mm.
are not to be trusted, and all of these things. So what we had to do was know that if we weren't able to exercise our right to abortion, then we could not control our destiny. That if you can't control your reproductive health, you can't control your destiny.
That's
So
a lot.
that was the building the awareness. That's what this part of the work was. The next part came educating our sisters on how the body works, why the body works, what we need to do, and then you can move to advocacy. Very few people can go from 0 to 10. They
Mhm.
got to go through some stages. So I'm going to stop right there, and as I see we are on ways into the program. So okay.
You really schooled us, Billy. I love it. You gave us so many gems. I heard a lot of things about the original pamphlet being about finding voice and breaking silence and breaking
Right.
through stigma. I really love how you grounded us in the context of the fact that that pamphlet was written at a time when folks wouldn't even say abortion. And even now, I think there's been a recent push to get politicians to actually say the word. I think
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Biden had to be pushed to say the word.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested. We can come back to this later in that piece that you said around folks being present for certain birthing initiatives, but not for the abortion ones. So I'm
Mhm,
gonna come
mhm.
back to you, but for a second, I want to talk to Zane. I would love if you could tell us how you came into this work. What is the context for RJ, you feel like for your generation? Just anything you want to share.
Yeah, and thank you again, Billy, for that that
Mhm.
history. Because I think for me, um, when I was an undergrad student, I was doing a lot of work around outreach for those individuals that lived in Baltimore City that were diagnosed with HIV, that had been out of care. So a lot of my introduction as a health education specialist and a public health practitioner came from doing community outreach and linking folks to care and just seeing the disparities that existed. You see the profiles of folks when you get the intake form and you're like, oh my goodness, this is a teenager. Oh my goodness. And you start to see the profile of that person. And then my role was to actually go into the community and find that person, right? Numbers that didn't work, addresses that, there
Mhm,
may have
mhm,
been a home there at one point, but now
mhm,
was boarded up. So now we
mhm,
have folks that don't have housing, may not be able to take care of themselves. And it's my role to go find them and to link them back into care. But my role was limited. I was only told I had to link them to care and provide them with 2 appointments. So that means if I found that person, I can link them to care, take them to 2 appointments, and then after 2 appointments, my service was done, because that was the agreement between that nonprofit organization and then the medical system there in Baltimore. And so as I was doing the work and seeing and hearing those things, and also being a part of the support group for the youth that were impacted by HIV, those that had recently been diagnosed, and just hearing their stories, it empowered me to do more of this work, because I knew that at that time doing outreach, it was a lot, right? Anyone that has done outreach work, you know that, sometimes it takes you 100 tries to even get that person to understand and get that person connected. And, I would feel discouraged when I would have 50 forms that I had to do outreach for, and I only got one person. And so I knew that I wanted to focus then on Black women, but then also the prevention and care of women, even when they're diagnosed with certain conditions, whether it's a chronic condition or whether it's infectious disease. That piqued my interest. And so at that time, I didn't know anything about reproductive justice. It wasn't introduced to me at that time. And, this is like 2013, 2014, I'm an undergrad, but I'm doing a service in the community. I'm seeing this impact. I had to do an internship, right, to graduate. And I made it clear I wanted to focus on the health of Black women, because I said, my own lived experience, the lived experience of my mom, my grandmother, women in my family leaving this world prematurely from conditions that could have been prevented. And so I went through an internship program, and I was placed at the Black Women's Health Imperative. It was then when I joined as an intern, I was introduced to reproductive justice. Of course, when I got here, I was still supporting the HIV work that was happening. But then when I came back and I was working on my master's, I was introduced to the My Sister's Keeper program, which I lead to this day, which I'm so happy about, because I started out as an intern and was introduced to it. But then, even being introduced to it at that time, I was still young, and I'm still young at RJ, although I'm a part of the 30 crew. I'm no longer in my 20s, y'all. I know they kicked me out, but it's okay. It let me know that I could apply what I'm learning in the field and in public health, but then also see the connection to the work. I'm so sorry if y'all can hear my nephew crying. I can start to see the influence of it, right? Because in public health, we have health in all policies, right? But now I started to understand that reproductive justice is everywhere. It's in everything. It's going to touch every piece as it's in, as it affects that individual. And so, again, I'm still growing. That was my connection, knowing that the community work still has to happen, but then also how we take the community work and uplift it, right? How do we continue to spread awareness to talk about these things that folks don't want to talk about or don't want to name explicitly? Then getting to the education piece, like Billy said, in my role as a health educator, that's my background, making sure that I'm not only giving the information, but giving folks the tools and the resources to apply it, but then also the advocacy piece, right? So mobilizing with folks and going to make sure that these policies are health promoting and really center what we need in this movement. So all that to say, that was my introduction to RJ.
Thank you. So I'm gonna pass it over to our youth, and Pony, I would love if you could tell us how you come into Repro Justice, and specifically hone in on why youth Repro Justice is so important.
Yeah, so my freshman year of undergrad, I met who's a mentor to me now, one of my professors, who was kind of you're very vocal, there was racial justice issues happening on my campus that I was very outspoken about. I also had issues with the intersectionality of feminism at the time. I was critiquing it and being this doesn't work for black folks. And so there was a lot that I like to say that a lot of black folks innately were born as advocates, because to exist in a world that didn't want you to exist fully as yourself, in order to continue living, you kind of have to constantly be pushing back and asking questions. So it was my 17-year-old brain was always just no, you're not gonna do me like that. And then here was this mentor, this older woman who was let me give you the words for what you're talking about, or read this, or talk about this, or look into this. And it was just super empowering. And so then I applied for to be a part of Advocates for Youth. But it wasn't until I like to say that actually where I felt truly like, wow, like repro, like I was pulled into repro work and I felt so empowered and saw the intersectionalities of how it impacts my life wasn't until like about a year later when my dad was detained by ICE. So my dad was incarcerated for about 5 months. And when it happened, I wasn't like telling anybody. Like our family was just like, I'm West African, so we're like, we're gonna figure this out. It stays here. But it was a lot happening, and I was in college, and I had like 3 jobs. I was juggling a lot, and I was like on campus doing a lot of things, also working with Advocates for Youth, but also like having these check-ins that I'm not telling like the person I'm checking in with like what's going on in my life. And then there was this period where I like ended up getting candida. And so like I was like, okay, I called my mom, like, do I have health insurance? And my mom's like, your health insurance is through your dad. And your dad, like, and he, so you don't have health insurance. And I was just like, okay. And she's like, well, I got health insurance for the kids, but like, you're an adult, like, I don't know what to tell you. And so I was just like, okay. My friends were like, go to Planned Parenthood. And I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna check out Planned Parenthood. And while I was there, it was like the first time that I was telling somebody what was going on, because they were like, are you stressed? Are you like, what's up? What's going on in your life? Because like that's like it's a really bad yeast infection essentially. And I just started crying. Yeah, I was like, I have 4 jobs and I'm in school and my dad's in ICE custody and blah, 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 blah. And it was just sitting there with like a provider and then being like, that's a lot. And like, you got to take care of yourself. And like, is there anybody that you feel comfortable talking to? And then ironically enough, the next person that I told what was going on was my like, I guess, youth leader at Advocates, who I love to this day. And I told them what was happening and they automatically was like, what resources do you need? Who do we need to contact? I know in Oregon, Minnesota, I know this, I know that, how can we help you? And they helped actually with the process of me running this whole campaign, this letter writing campaign, and becoming vocal and telling my community and my family members what was going on to raise funds to get my dad a good lawyer. And my dad ended up getting out of ICE custody. But I reflect on like the intersectionalities of how like being with a part of the criminal justice system, even though I wasn't directly in the criminal justice system, but having a parent in the criminal justice system, what that did to like me and my siblings, and just how like my repro, like something like candida that, I was not going day by day thinking that this could happen over like extreme stress. But like that's just how everything is so intersection, and it made me have a more awareness in the work that I was doing, because before I was like, yeah, like we should, have access to contraceptives. We should have inclusive comprehensive sex ed. But then I was like, yeah, like everything like really does intersect, and like you just never know. Today is today, and then tomorrow, like as a Black person in this world, like anything could happen. And so that for me, that was what it was. And I think it's so important for young people to be in this work, because young people are experiencing, like systemic inequities. I think oftentimes people think that we are byproducts, especially like children. They think that like children like birth to 12 years old are just byproducts. They're not actively people experiencing like reproductive traumas or experiencing like lack of education within that, which is now impacting like their safety. We don't think about it like that. We think like, oh, kids are too young. You'll hear politicians say that a lot. Like, this is uncomfortable. We shouldn't be teaching them this. But young people are humans. And if we know that babies are born experiencing the traumas of racism, then like we should be able to understand that like all forms of systemic like injustice is impacting them. Homelessness is impacting young children, like lack of food is impacting young children, lack of inclusive comprehensive sexual education is impacting young children every day. And so for me, it was just so important, and reflecting again on my childhood and all the ways that like repro justice to me is like the radical form of kind of tackling racial inequities. I just thought it was so important that young people are always centered, and that we are always like ensuring that they have the tools and the education to make like informed choices, and we're fighting for them, and we're bringing them in to fight for themselves as well, because we have so much wealth of knowledge that we can contribute to this work. So thank you
so much, Pony. We're gonna come back to some of the points you made, but before that, I want to get Courtney, how you came into the work and why this moment for youth is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So during my freshman year also, it's actually really funny because it was kind of around the same age as you, Pony. During my freshman year, I had like joined a club and I met someone, and they were in Advocates for Youth, and through already like just speaking out on campus in my first year about different issues that I saw, they recommended that I join. And I was like, honestly not prepared for like what was to come next, but it was pretty amazing. There was already a really heavy team through Advocates for Youth in my city. And then in a city also where I was surrounded by, I lived in Las Vegas, so I was surrounded by major STI and STD rates, lacking adequate health services, that already like pushed me to want to, pursue reproductive justice as one of my passions, because I had already learned about how autonomy, racism, classism, how those intersected through reading, but also through my own personal experience. And so I'm sure my mom is joining us today, so I'm sure she can attest, through my own struggles, all I ever saw was how I can change someone else's life. So being able to like join advocates and just speak up, speak out for people was a life-changing moment. It's impacted me a lot, and it's been really amazing to just continue learning. And I think that this moment is so important for youth, because we are the future, like this, it's really just that simple. Like we are, like we said, we're standing on so many shoulders, and thankfully we have so much knowledge, so many things laid out for us, that all we can do is do better. All we can do is push through our own advocacy so that we can see a better future. Because what I saw like in my own city, having such like a horrible sex education experience, but then being able for it to be supplemented. I was in a club where like 3 years in a row, they had the Southern Nevada Health District come out and teach us for weeks about sexual health. So that also changed my trajectory, different than a lot of students in my school, because I was in this small club, and I had wished that they had expanded that to just give it to, isn't that simple? Just give it to all the students. Like we had to invite this health district in, when instead the district, the school district could have just provided this for us. So that's a little bit about my story and why I think it's so important for us today.
Thank you. And shout out to your mom for joining. I hope she is as proud of you as we are. I want to go back to two things that you all said. So Pony, you talked a lot about how like the lack of immigration justice and the carceral system impacted you as a child. And I think Courtney, you spoke a little briefly about how access to comprehensive sex education really changed your path. And so when you all think about the 15 demands that you came up with, what is the one that you think that like is closest to your heart? What is the one that you're like, we need to achieve this for youth repo justice? And Pony, you look like you want to go first, so I'm gonna let you go. No? Courtney, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the amount of things that have impacted me are like wild, but one that definitely sticks out to me is ending the criminalization of youth and releasing all children from jails and prisons, juvenile detention centers. Nothing hits home like something that you've seen multiple people go through. So I have family members still, incarcerated right now. And so just that experience within itself is horrifying. Honestly, we need to do better, especially this re-entry time we're coming into, where people are absolutely not able to re-enter society in a helpful or productive way, for their own health. So that is one that definitely hits home for me.
I was actually going to say the exact same one. And just because I think like when we're talking access and like how to ensure that everyone gets access, like criminalization is literally like the end all be all of that effort, right? And so like how can we like cancel that out? And also like when we look at a lot of like young Black girls who are being funneled into the prison system, especially from like young ages, a lot of that is rooted in a lack of cultural competency and just again like the over criminalization of Black girls, like our identities, our existence, who we are, how we speak, how we exist. And so there's things like young Black folks are rarely ever diagnosed with like things like ADHD, and that like impacts, right? Like you would say, oh, this young white child who might be acting this way has ADHD, so like teachers will give them more care. If a Black child is acting that way, it's like they're unruly, like they're disrespectful, get them out of my class. And so when you think about all those things that again, like from a radical point, like it's just continued to build on like our lack of access and like the dehumanization of like Black bodies and Black children, and how like again children don't even realize what's happening when it's happening. You spend so much of your life being told by each teacher, each new environment that you're in, that you're not fit for this environment, like you're not a good person, you're not good to be here. And like over time it's like, what do you expect that so many like young Black children have to go through like this process of like like de-traumatizing themselves, if even, right? And we still don't even have the full resources for that. So I would personally say, like, yeah, I agree with that too, that I think like ending all criminalization and completely like divesting and defunding police systems would greatly like improve reproductive like health.
And if I could just add really quickly, I think that also has a lot to do with the stigmatization. Like Billy mentioned, Avery, people wouldn't even say the words. So if we can't even get down to like having the conversations about how we're criminalized, it's gonna, it's just gonna continue to happen.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you both for sharing and sharing so intimately and bravely. Pony, I really relate to your story. I like to speak a lot about what it means to be like a daughter of an incarcerated parent. And you mentioned something about like you couldn't even say that out loud. And I remember being 6 and 7 years old, like that was saying your father was in prison was like not something you were supposed to say out loud, at least not in front of certain company. And I myself didn't even think like, oh, what are the health connections to that, to the stress of growing up like that? How does that impact Black girls' health? And we say one of the pillars of repo justice is the right to parent in safe and healthy environments. And that's impossible with an incarcerated parent, right? I want to go back to you, Billy, for a second and talk about like from then and now, where do you think we've improved in the repo justice terrain? And where do you feel like you can't believe we're still talking about this? I mean, I imagine abortion, but
Well, first of all, I think you where you have improved is all over the board. I am just feel honored to be able to sit here with you, 4 young women who are so full of information, full of energy, full of life, absolutely totally brilliant in your analysis and everything. So we've come a very, very long way, which doesn't mean that we are even halfway in the battle. I was just talking to Zane yesterday, and she was telling me she's doing her dissertation on women seeking abortions and what they're going to do now, now after everything is getting all messed up here at the Dobbs decision. And she's doing the first dissertation on abortion for Morgan State School of Public Health. The first person that, I mean, so you see what I'm saying? So we are not arrived when when we're still doing first. We're still doing first. Okay. So that's one thing I want to say. I'll tell you what though. I love your energy and your spirit, and you got a lot of work to do. Each one of those demands that you put out is an entire program in themselves. But there's some things I want you to think about as you go forth. First of all, it's very important that you work across your color line in terms of income. You got to go into the housing projects and work with these young women, these young girls there. When you get there, you're going to get the incarceration, you're going to get the sexual abuse, you're going to get the negative attitudes about their periods, you're going to get everything. It's a little microcosm of everything you need to deal with exists within many of those families. And a good entree is through work that Zanae is doing around menstruation. That's a good place. All the girls gonna get their periods. And you know what I mean? It's a good hook. It's a good way for you to make entree. And once you get them, that's when the consciousness raising has to start, when they 7 and 8 and 9 years old, because they're getting their periods earlier and earlier. And so that's when all the sexual abuse starts. That's when all of the taking away their power starts. That's when the control starts. That's when they're dealing with the stresses of their parents being sent off by ICE or taken to jail, or somebody got shot, or my cousin got shot last night next door. I've seen somebody get killed. You see what I'm saying? So think about that. You got to work with the people who live on the lower resources. They'll give you a certain amount of power and insight. You're part of the thing of where this whole thing around reproductive, our pamphlet and reproductive justice, the basis of it. At the Black Women's Health Project, we start bringing women together to talk about what is your life like for you being a Black woman? What was hard growing up and what was good? And when you just ask those two questions, what was hard for you growing up? And you get those real raw stories, you start understanding the intersectionalities. So we didn't have that word then, but we sat in the circle with sisters whose babies died, who they wanted, infant mortality. We sat in the circle with women whose mamas died having them, maternal mortality. We sat in the circle with women who were incest victims. We sat in the circle with women who had babies much too early and they were mothers too long. We sat in circles with women who would give anything to have a baby and they were infertile. We sat in the circle. You see what I'm saying? So you get 25 of these people in the room and you got all the intersectionalities right in front of you. And so that's what reproductive justice grew from. Us telling our stories and looking at all the intersectionalities. So, okay, so there's one more thing I want to tell you, in case I don't get to say this. This is the last thing I want to say.
Okay.
This is a fertile time for you to organize young women, like young women, and across the board. Because I just left. I just was down in DeLand, Florida, where I grew up, and this Stetson University is the university there. It's a white, dominantly white private school, which I couldn't go to because I was in segregated town. But I'm glad I didn't go there anyway because I got a much better education at Talladega where I went. But nevertheless, the point was, if I wanted to go there, I couldn't go, and so they brought me down there, brought me and my wife down there, and we were down there with them for 4 days. And I'm telling you, these young girls are so young women are so hungry for just this that you have. They are very upset. Florida is a powder keg. There's some crazy stuff going on there. And they're crying, they're angry, they're everything. And they I told them to stop agonizing and organize, but they need something to hook on to. And it's just, I'm saying this, don't be afraid to go into these places that you'd be surprised the support you're gonna find there. But you got to do it. And you got the last thing I'm gonna say is you got to get these other women of color doing the same thing that you're doing. We building a movement. We're not building a one-way highway. As I told them, RJ is not a 2-lane highway. It's not a 1-lane road. It's a goddamn freeway. We need as many people on this freeway as we can get on the freeway. So, yeah, you get the other people, teach them how to do what you did down that color line, and they'll all be on together because we are the global majority. And somebody has to lead the organizing of the global majority. And I say that, and I'm gonna stop.
Thank you so much. Billy said, get organized, everyone. I hope you heard that.
Don't agonize, organize.
Okay, that's the quote for tonight. You used the term intersectionality, which to me, and you also referenced Florida. Right now in Florida, we're seeing a lot of bans on trans youth, bans on trans people. We're seeing an attack on the school systems.
Yeah.
And I know there are some states that are also trying to introduce like parental bill of rights. And so here at Girls for Gender Equity, with our RJ campaign that's coming out in June, I'll talk more about that later, we added 2 more pillars to the original 3 of RJ. And at GGE, we like to say that RJ is also the right to determine one's gender and sexuality. And then we say the right to children's liberation. So basically like full agency and autonomy and liberation for children or youth, recognizing what they go through from their parents, or what it means to be a group of people who are essentially owned by their parents, right? So I want to go to you, Zane, for a second, and because I know that you work with youth a lot in your role, particularly, what are you seeing around gender as it relates to RJ and youth? What are you seeing around education, like all of those things? What are you seeing in your work that you think we need to all pay attention to right now?
Yeah, I think it's so much going on. And when I say it's so much going on because all of it is a learning opportunity. I think everyone is on this path of exploration because there's so much information out there. And when we all get this information, we're trying to internalize the information, right? And see how that information is working for us. So seeing a lot, even in the work when we talk about youth, right? Mostly I work with 18 to 30, but even when I do have these conversations, right, around menstruation with high school folks and folks in middle school, they've already, they're the ones starting off with their pronouns, right? Like you don't have to ask them, they're starting off, they know what they want, they know what they're setting out to do. They are well aware of all the issues that take place. They're well aware of folks trying to restrict the education that they receive. They're well aware of the watering down of it and that they're not getting the full scope, and why they want organizations that understand that to come in and provide that to them because they're not getting that full comprehensive support that's needed. And so I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm also seeing that when we think about just the lens of RJ, right? We think about those pillars, even that the piece about the right to not parent. I'm thinking about folks that are parenting in a way that they did not give natural birth. And I'm centering my personal experience in that because that happened to me while I was still considered a youth, right? Where my mom died prematurely. I did not have my own children. I, was well aware of my contraceptive resources and I took advantage of them. I like to say one pill a day, keep the kids away. But there I was at 22 with a 6-year-old. And having to navigate that, right? Having to not only grow within myself, but then navigate that child, and then having to support that child as that child is starting to explore and define who they are, right? And so now I'm understanding that it's completely different. So I'm thinking that it's a natural process. Maybe you'll figure this out when you get to college. It's like, no, it's happening middle school, high school. And if we continue to perpetuate that code of silence, of shaming, and all those things that many of the folks before us have fought to break away from, we have to start to shape that in how we parent in the way that's supportive, right? We don't have to give birth, but we are there as role models, as parental figures, as big sisters, as the rich aunties, we're there in those capacities. So we do have influence. So I'm seeing that, right? Because Billy, as you said, folks need this along the income lines, right? I think about the folks that I grew up with in the hood, and they're like, Janae, what you doing? Well, they call me my nickname. They'd be like, who is Janae? But I still have to remember that I have to give them that information too, because some of them are still there, although I'm no longer there, but they still need the information. So when we talk about lived experience, I really try to stick true to that and think about how I'm doing that. And even as I am raising young boys in my home that I did not give birth to, I have to mirror that too when I go out and I'm talking to these youth about the work and how it impacts them and how they can be supportive, and knowing that they don't have to have a reproductive system to be a part of this and to be in support. So I'm seeing that, and then I'm always trying to internalize and explore and also try to center folks' experiences as we move along too. So I hope that answered that question, Bria.
That did. I know that, Billy, you have to leave at 7. So if you are an audience member and you have a question specifically for Billy, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A chat. But Pony or Courtney, do one of you have a question for Billy? Do you have a question for Billy or about the original pamphlet that you want to speak to right now?
I think we did internally talk a little bit about a question that we like wanted both Billy and Zanai to answer. And so it was pretty much about just like from your perspective now, from like all the work that has been done since like reproductive justice was coined, which has been like 30 years. What have you seen have been some like successes, things that back then you were like, we're trying to like accomplish this thing. If we could accomplish this thing, we'll feel so good. What do you feel like have been some accomplishments? And then what are things that you're still like, this isn't working? And then in reflection, why do you think like those things were not able to be accomplished? Like, and what isn't working about it currently?
Well, first of all, the presence of you all points to success. There's a whole cadre of young Black women who are actually leading this movement and doing the work. And I am so glad that I've had the privilege to live to see the day. I have no doubt that you will keep going the way you're going and continue to be successful. That is the thing that has worked. What is not working real well is we can't win this by ourselves. It's no way in the world. We can do what we can do working with Black women. We got to get white women and other women of color have got to get on board because we're up against some formidable, wrong-headed thinking people. And one of the things that I have always pushed, I don't know if there is a group of white young women comparable to you. There probably is. Y'all need to get together and encourage them to work with poor white women. They will not touch a poor white woman. They leave them up to the evangelicals, to the Christian conservatives, and we know their husbands beating them, raping them, keeping them barefoot and pregnant. They ain't got nothing. They don't understand their bodies. They're less free than a lot of other people, okay? So you got to encourage and push white women to work with their sisters. They'll always run over to the housing projects and work with Black people, but they won't work with their own poor white women. And they're the ones that's out there that's basically very ignorant, because we have to dismantle white supremacy. And the way white supremacy is working now is that this abortion stuff is not about us. Do you think these white men care whether or not we have babies or don't have them? They're glad we don't have them. It's because they can't make money off them anymore. But in order to get white women to have babies, they have to push it for us. So only white women can have white babies. A Black woman can be married to a white man, that baby is a baby of color.
Come on, Billy.
A white boy can be married to a Black woman, that baby is a baby of color. So this is the move to get white women to push them babies out. And y'all have to make sure that the white women understand that. Now, I don't think that on any given day, even if it stayed the same, they are not going to stop the coloration, the browning of America. Because first of all, as I said, we people of color are the global majority of the world. You just think global, I know global and rural is the same thing, but I want to drive that point home. And so you got to, if you get a chance, you got to deal with white women, because 52% of them voted for Trump, whereas like 98% of Black women voted against him. So we got our act together, but they have to get their acts of, see what I'm saying? We can't get to the finish line by ourselves. It's a collective finish line. All right. So that's the hard work. It's hard working with them. I've been 50 years in this struggle. Okay. I started in 1970, just a little bit before Roe v. Wade. Okay. So And I've been working with them, and it's very hard. They didn't turn over this whole RJ quote unquote movement until they run it in the ground. We were losing because they wouldn't listen to the likes of me and Loretta in the beginning when we asked them about expanding the definition of reproductive health, because we were sitting with Black women who were crying over their babies who died, who were crying over women who's crying over their mothers who died, and we wanted it to include infant mortality. And because I had done abortion and birth, you put abortion and birth together and you close up everybody's mouth. You see what I'm saying? There's power in that because they're all within us. But you got to first deal with the white women who think they know what they're doing and they don't. And their way is not the only way. There are other ways, but that's going to be a big struggle because you got racism involved in that, which is, you know, the mess, the mess. The last thing I want to say is, you know, I told you that there was only one word in your document that I want you to think about, and it was in the one that said dismantle the y'all were saying like dismantle the police and all that kind of thing. Okay, that needs to happen. Now don't be confused. That needs to happen.
Lily.
But when you say it in that way, you lose a lot of people who are not where you are in the thinking. So you know, if you take some of that money away from them, they got way too much in the beginning. But the word dismantle is a turnoff to a lot of people who would be on your side. They would think, well, we don't want to have less police and less training and less whatever. What you want is more money for you. You see what I'm saying? So just figure that out. I'm not suggesting you change a thing in your pamphlet. Be ready to defend it
Mhm.
in a way that you can bring people over to your side. Because the first thing they think about is they're gonna cut the police, and we aren't gonna have any police, and we ain't gonna have no ambulances, and we're not gonna have any fire people. You know, they're gonna take that money and put it. There's enough money for them to still get what they're getting, and for you to get what you need on top of that. So that's something for y'all to struggle with. Okay. But
Okay.
other than that,
You said there's a generational divide on takes
yeah.
on abolition.
Yeah, that's all it is. I think you're perfectly right now. Don't be confused. I think you're right. It's just that you want people to hear you. That's all I'm saying.
The next roundtable, we're going to talk about intergenerational viewpoints on abolition. That's going to be the next. But before you dip out, Billy, you do have one audience question. We have an audience
Okay.
compliment. Someone said, Billy, I am so inspired by your work. You're the epiphany of a change agent. Thank you for your knowledge and devotion to making the lives of Black women easier. And someone asked you a question and they said, in thinking about Black maternal health, what are the top 5 most important factors in improving the wellness of Black women? I would say Black women and girls for the sake of today's convo.
Well, in terms of maternal health, there are so many levels. There's a level of the individual. I say to sisters, be as healthy as you can before you get pregnant. And that's really hard because most of us, we know, we ain't sitting there planning, okay, now I'm gonna go and lay down and I'm gonna get pregnant on the 17th of March and then I'm gonna have my baby, 9 months later. That's not the way it works. We get caught, but try to be as healthy as you can when you get pregnant. Get your dental care. Dental care is difficult in this country. It's expensive. I myself go to Mexico to get my care because I couldn't afford it here, and I got it there for a tenth of what was here with great doctors. I'm not suggesting everybody do that, but I'm saying pay attention to your teeth because there's a big relationship between your dental care and your pregnancy. Learn as much as you can about your body. A good person to always have as a good friend is a nurse. Always have a nurse as a good friend because they can help you navigate a lot of the water. So first pay attention to yourself and try to be the healthiest you can do because we got some systems out here that will knock you down the minute you get there. So I think the use of doulas now is going to help a lot with pregnancy and delivery and postpartum care, which is where you run into a lot of trouble with postpartum care. So please take care of yourself and know that pregnancy is it's our big job. It's like the greatest job on earth. The biggest thing that you're going to be given to do is to be entrusted with the care of another human being. There is no greater job. And so that's what I used to say to young teenagers. Do you want to be doing your biggest job in the world when you're 16? Or do you want to wait until you're a little bit older? So I think self-care is like absolutely crucial. There's a thing going on among Catholic hospitals that own a lot of the hospitals with refusals. That if you run into maternity trouble and you in one of these hospitals that are mostly in our communities, and something happens where they have to make a decision, whose life is it? Is it the life of the mother, or is it the life of the unborn fetus? They're gonna go for the fetus. They're gonna let you die. So, and if an abortion would save your life, they will not do it, and they will not tell you where you can go to get one. So research the place where you plan to have your birth, because that's crucial. And you find out who decides. Is it the decision of the two people involved? Because most people still getting pregnant by an old-fashioned way with two people. Or is it decision of the hospital rules that come down from the Pope in Rome? Whose
Mm.
decision is it? So that's that's a biggie. That's a biggie. And then make a plan. Make a plan. Think this thing through. Because as I said, the waters are treacherous, they're hard, and too many Black women are dying after trying to give birth. Too many are dying, and there's nothing like having you some support. So y'all, I know you all into the whole digital thing and these friends on your phone and all that, but you need some people in your life. You need some sisters who can come over and look. Y'all need to take care of each other. Build you a support a system around you. You don't have to do it alone, and it ain't much fun. Anyway, build you some sister. Learn how to be a girlfriend. Learn how to be a good girlfriend. You can trust Black women, and Black women can take care of you. And there's some men who can do it too, and you can't leave them out because a lot of them are ignorant and they're not taking care of themselves either. And they influencing a lot of sisters, because a lot of sisters still listen to these people when they don't know nothing. And so you got to deal with the men too. So it's a big job you got out there, but you got a whole lifetime to do it. Just think, I'm still as passionate today as I was when I started. So, I've been in it 50 years. So you got a 50-year stretch ahead of you. This is not going to happen over the night. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Thank you so much, Billy. We appreciate your presence. Thank you for being one of the original signers and writers and coming to talk to our youth about their pamphlet. I know you have to leave, but hopefully we get to share space with you again in the future.
All right. Okay. Well, is there another question? There's no other question, right?
No, just praise.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
So as we're almost finished, but I have two final questions for you all. So my next question is basically, what does it mean to be a young Black person and to be in the repo justice movement right now in this time? And I'll let y'all think on that for a second. So like, what does it mean to be living in this Roe has fallen world? Pony and Courtney, for you, what does it mean to be youth living and organizing and writing in this world? Zane, I feel like we still youth, but same thing.
I can go ahead and start because I have internalized this because honey, it's a lot. And it's so funny because when I think about the RJ framework, I see me all in it, right? I can see it actualizing in my life. And knowing that I'm doing this work, right? The best way I know how from my vantage point, letting folks that know more than me lead the way, but also being there to support and learn so I can also help and lead in which way I need to. But I just think about the day-to-day struggles, right? Of just being a young Black woman. I think about the struggle of first, right? How Billy said, like the first, why are first still happening, right? The first to do this, the first to do that. And as someone who's the first in my family to do a lot of things, I'm carrying that with me. And I'm like, dang, and I got to carry this too in work. And it's like, where is the rest? Where do you find the rest? So I think it's a lot. But I think it's good pressure because we have something to look forward to. It's something that we can center ourselves in. And I think that as we look for the liberation for us as a collective, I'm also seeking that liberation for myself. In my day-to-day practices. Because again, honey, one thing about me, I'm a harp on that pillar about the right to not have a child, honey. That's where I live. But I live in that pillar because when I was younger, as someone that had reproductive issues that were biology sent down from my mom, right? There were genetics around cysts, fibroids, having to have surgeries and things like that when I was younger, having to navigate the health field, having to advocate for myself, even with my parents, right? And saying like, y'all don't know my body. Y'all can't tell me what to do. I feel this, you don't feel this, and not being heard, and then going and showing up to the doctor and they're like, oh my gosh, you have a cyst the size of an egg in your breast and you're 12, right? And so it's not to say that this work, as this young Black woman that I am now, 30, and experiencing this, I saw this when I was 12. And how I had to navigate it. I saw it when it came to me getting my period and I'm in pain thinking I'm going to die. My mom like, yeah, girl, just go get the pads under the sink. There was no conversation around it. It was like, don't think you grown. Don't get to start smelling yourself, right? So experiencing that. And then now here I am as Black woman, 30, navigating this work is takes up majority of my life. I'm navigating it. And it's like, dang, I can't ever separate myself from this because it's my lived experience, honey. And I'm just going to keep seeing it evolve. And so, yeah, again, RJ and everything, RJ in my whole life, it shapes how I even parent my brother, my nephew, the other children in my family, how I am also trying to break the code of silence that exists in our family to talk about those things so I can collectively at least get my family there. Now, who's to say they're going to get there? I don't know. But like Billy said, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to try to get the white woman, honey, but it's really hard to try to get the family together, okay? But when we're in space, we know it's going to take some time. And I think that fight is always going to be in us because we're having to fight in our daily lives. And so we're willing to fight for the collective goal of reproductive freedom because we need it. So, yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for dropping that. I'm really like, when you said you can't, like you knew this at 12, I feel that even in my soul of just like, I knew what RJ was before I knew what the word was, right? Like I knew there was something around being a young Black girl, and there was something around my health, my future relationship to mothering, the fact that I was a caretaker before the age of 12, right? Oldest daughter syndrome over here, right? Like this is impacting young people, young Black girls, young Black queer people, young Black trans folks, like now. It's not we're doing this so when you get older. No, it's a now. It is a now, right? And so when I think about this pamphlet and GGE's campaign that's coming out, I think about like what does it mean to create demands and advocacy and organizing for Black girls right now? They need it right now. That's why my favorite demand is when you all said, scrap the labor laws, like no young people need to be working, and give them all a universal income. And I'm like, I know so many young people who are either working formally or informally to help supplement their families, right? That's something they need right now. So I want to go to you, Pony, for the same question. Like, what does it mean? Especially to you.
I would say right now in this moment, to be honest, I would say frustrated is where I feel like I land to be a Black woman and in repro work, but also just existing in this time. And I think the reason why frustrating, I think everyone comes to this point. So I think it's really important in a generational conversation to like be the young person voicing this frustration, because it's kind of like the younger, I feel like when you're really young and you start this work, you kind of have this like, duh, like, all I got to do is tell you that this needs to happen and we're going to make it happen because there's a million of us saying this is what's happening. And like, and so you have this level of like, it's easy. Like when you're younger, you're just like, it's easy. Maybe they just didn't say it right. Like, let me try again. Like, what if we all say, what if we protest? What if we, advocate? What if we talk to lawmakers? What if we become lawmakers, right? Like, what if we're in the spaces? What if we're at the table? Like, you have all of these things that you are kind of like, taught growing up that like, if you just do this, you just gotta believe, you just gotta da-da. And I think in a way, for me anyways, I'm overly optimistic sometimes. So I think in a way, like in my mind, I was like, we got this. And I think especially when George Floyd happened, like for me being in Minnesota and kind of being an advocate in Minnesota, that was another big moment for me in my advocacy work where I was like, okay, this is it. Once all this happens, like we finally have white people agreeing, like understanding, like we have police officers coming on talking like, yeah, they right. Like, I'm like, all right, we're gonna get it. And then, a couple of months later, there was nothing. And now we're in a time period where I feel like, and I said during our conversation about all of this, like I feel like in my lifetime, I've lived through 3 like big advocacy moments that you thought would change everything. And then everything went back to normal. You have this weird stage where like when everything goes back to normal, like as the person who's still being impacted, who's still seeing these laws like hurt your community, who's still knowing that you don't have access, who's still understanding that like you're still in danger, you're just like, what? Like we're back to the Twilight Zone? Like, so when bosses were doing the whole speech in 2020 about, equity and, wanting to uplift our Black and employees of color, when people were, having these big conversations and saying like, okay, we're going to stop this, we're going to be better, we're going to do this. All of that was a lie when we were offering housing to like our populations experiencing homelessness. Like now we're just all back to like, we just got to do us. Like, so it's really frustrating. I'll say that's kind of where I've been. And then again, like, experiencing so much of what happened in Minneapolis and like kind of seeing a lot of like violence live in my face. And then myself too being incarcerated during a protest. Like I did have a moment where like I had to step back because I was just really hurt, like in a way that like I couldn't fully understand. And I didn't want that hurt to be in movement spaces because I just felt like this is not the right time to be a part of community. But I was actually listening to an activist, Erica, I can't think of their last name, but they're big, they have a big Insta following, I love them. But they had said, they're like, when you're hurting, don't leave community. Like we forget sometimes that like, this movement work isn't all about work, right? It's a collective, it's community. It's also when you're like, I'm frustrated, I'm hurt, like, I don't feel like things are working, or like, I don't feel like I'm good enough as an organizer, as an advocate. Like, I don't know where my voice is anymore. Like, that's when you are supposed to lean on community. So like, they can pick you up. And I think like for Black women, that's something that's really hard for us because, and like what you said, the first daughter trope, I'm the first daughter. So it's like, you better know what you need to know and always be ready. And if I ever feel like I'm not good enough at something or I don't know the answer and I can't help my family, my community, I feel defective. And so like, it was frustrating for me to kind of have this like self moment of like, so everything that happened, it didn't, like, what did we do wrong? What did I do wrong? Like, maybe I shouldn't have said this. Maybe I shouldn't have did this. Like, like, so that's how I feel like right now in this moment, that I almost feel like people are in this like, and I think it's not Black folks, it's not people of color, it's not people that are still on the margins experiencing all of this. It's the folks that was hooting and hollering and talking about allyship in 2020 that have now gone back and they're carrying on with their lives and they're going to their beach houses and they're able to fly their kids to wherever they need to get abortions when they need it. Like they're able to get access, like they don't really care. Like it's those people that I'm over here like, wait, what are you doing? What are you doing? But now they feel like, oh, 2020, I marched. I got it. I got the accolade. 2020, I did what I needed to do. So you can't tell me that I'm not an ally. And so like, that's like a really frustrating place to be. And that's why when we were talking, I was like, I feel like the term repro justice was co-opted, right? Like repro justice was about centering folks that are marginalized in this conversation about reproductive health and access. It was about kind of changing the tables and bringing in intersectionality. But here we are now where like that term has been co-opted by a lot of like white middle-class women in their work towards ensuring they have abortion access and all the things. And it's kind of been continued. It's been co-opted by a lot of big orgs. It's been co-opted by a lot of big companies who like push out this repro message. But when what they really mean is like, we're talking about white people. We're talking about white women. We're not talking about trans Black women. We're not talking about queer youth. We're not talking about young people. We're not talking about Black folks, Indigenous folks. We're not talking about these people. Like we're talking about white women. And so like, it's kind of disheartening and frustrating. But I'm grateful and I'm an optimistic person. So I'm gonna cry today. Like Beyonce said, I'm gonna give myself 24 hours to cry. And then tomorrow we're gonna be back at it. So yeah.
At least say we got another 50 years. So let's hope not. But Courtney, question. Throw that same question to you.
Got you. Yeah. So I'm happy that I am who I am, and I'm happy that I'm passionate about abolition and education and sexual health. To be able to provide empowerment and support for those younger than me. I've already been able to like, I'm still teaching right now. I teach social emotional learning to youth 4th to 8th grade. I was also able to teach those in high school, like SAT and and IELTS prep when I was in Morocco. And so being able to be in those spaces and like teach young people and see how they're so like conflicted. You know, when I was in Morocco, I got to teach, and these students were so like, we're not smart, we're not going to be able to get to these schools, because you have to understand these students in other countries are trying to get to America, you know, for their own reasons. And so being able to tell them, you guys are brilliant, you guys know 3 languages off top, you know, like just being able to be in those spaces with youth. And although that wasn't necessarily reproductive justice focus, I have been able to continue, you know, inspiring those that come after me. And so I think that living through that and living through my own personal things, like Zane said, it's tough in this country due to our own healthcare and stigma. And another point, kind of like we mentioned earlier, there is still a lot of ignorance in our culture and violence. And I feel like capitalism is making us focus on the wrong things. Like we said, we're not able to relate to each other because a lot of those activities are being taken away from us in place of working and our side hustles and those things, you know, which is something I'm trying to get away from. So I feel like if we are able to like make those, you know, that get our families together, build that sisterhood, build those community care, the things that are being taken away from us, I think that is an amazing place to start. I hope I answered the question right. I might have needed to hear it again. Sorry about that.
The answer was perfect.
Okay, awesome.
We are running out of time, but I would love to read a small paragraph that the RJ Collective of Youth wrote, if that's okay with you all, because there's a part that I think is really important. And so it says, we may not have the language adults have. We may not know all the stats, but we know the world we want to grow up in. We don't want your bans, your false protections, your wealth hoarding, your violence, or your control. We want a world free of gender and sexual violence, a world where we can afford to live well, a world where adults can't hurt us. We want full reproductive freedom. And I love that paragraph so much. And I think it gets us into the very final question that that someone asked in the audience that I want to uplift. And it says, for the young people, what areas of repo justice do you think impact youth the most, but is shaped by older people without any counsel from youth? What do you think should be done? As a hard question. Who wants to take a stab at it?
I would say all, to be like quite honest. I don't think there's any area within reproductive health that really like radically and enthusiastically gives like young people the opportunity to like be fully present and shaping it and speaking to it. And that's why I think there's testament to that with all the orgs that exist currently that are trying their hardest to bring young people into the conversation and trying to normalize it. Because when we talk strategy, and I think that's some of the stuff that Billy was talking about like strategizing, how do we use the right language to, you know, connect with everyone. When you're talking strategy, sometimes like when you're talking about like lawmakers, like even orgs that are doing the best that they can do, sometimes they do have to be like, okay, let's not focus on the fact that we're trying to make sure that 5-year-olds are also receiving like comprehensive sex ed, because we know we might lose like Republicans, we might lose the people on the other side that are going to support this bill. Like let's just move it from there today. But we know what we mean when we say young people, you know, like we try to like play around and cut corners because like we just know what's up. And so I would personally say like if I'm talking from where can we start to try to be more inclusive of young people, I would say first from education, because again, like you have like young people younger than, and I've done early childhood work. So whenever I'm talking young people, I'm really talking like babies. I'm really talking like toddlers, because I also have experiences being in my community, like, and also my personal experiences of like sexual violence at an age before I was 8. And so like, when we know all these like statistics and the realities of that, like, it's wild to think that people will say like, oh no, like, especially in Black community, it's like, oh, they too young for that. Like, especially with Black little girls, like you're trying to act grown now because you know this, you know that, like, that's an issue. And so like, one, it would be teaching our communities, you know, like this is important, and explaining to them why it's important, because it's not even something that's far-fetched. Like once you start sitting with like communities, and so many of us know we come from families where somebody got a story, where somebody's kid, where somebody like it, when you start explaining that, saying like, what would have happened if like that 5-year-old knew like this is the language, this is how you can explain this, or knew that they were safe, like they were in a household where they were safe to say like, this person makes me uncomfortable, like this person did this to me, this is why this wasn't right. And so it's simple things like that, and comprehensive age appropriate sexual education, I think, is a great way to go ahead and like start that training, so young people have an awareness, rather than like having to come into that awareness a little later when they're 15 or 16, and like maybe they're talking about it in school, or they're talking about sex with their friends. When there's a full awareness that like reproductive, you know, healthcare and education is not just sex, I think young people are also able to like see how like they have autonomy in this, and like be vocal, and like also partner with those 5-year-olds and ask them like what they enjoy about their classrooms, ask them what they would like to see more, because people always get scared. They're like, how do we engage kids? You talk to them in their language. Like, what do you like about your teacher? What's your favorite part? What do you not like about your teacher? How do you like to say hello? How do you not like to say hello? Is there ever a time that you don't like to say hello to certain people? Talk to them just like that, and kids will tell you any and everything you want to know. Like, and so they're wonderful people to partner with and like work with in this line of work. And so I'd say that's my advice for how we can do this individually. I guess collectively, and then also like on an individual level, talk more to the kids in your life and see them as full people. So yeah.
I love that. I feel like you really brilliantly closed us out. So what I'm gonna do is everybody gets one sentence, and what do you think is the future for the Repo Justice movement? And you get one sentence, and I'll start with you, Zane.
One sentence, Bria. Oh my gosh. What? Say the question again. What
do you think is the future for the Repo Justice movement in one sentence?
In one sentence, I think the future of the reproductive justice movement, I think the future is us. And I'm gonna close it at that. Us.
That was cute. Courtney, one sentence.
The future is bravery.
Ooh. Pony, one sentence.
The future is access.
Oh, I love that. All right, everyone. We are actually right on time. I want to thank everyone who joined, everyone who read the pamphlet. Please, please, please sign on. So we're actually asking for sign on as your organization, or sign on as your individual self. And then we hope you can join Girls for Gender Equity for the launch of our RJ campaign in June. All the writers of this pamphlet will be at the Black Feminist Future Get Free convening, and they will be launching our RJ campaign for us. And it's gonna be amazing. So thank you, Zane, so much. Thank you, Pony. Thank you, Courtney. And thank you to the GGE team behind the scenes running this chat and these slides. And I hope everybody has a wonderful night. Bye.
Yes.